Welcome back to Let's Get Haunted
with your hosts,
Nat Strawn
and Allie. Welcome back, Haunties, to episode 216 of Let's Get Haunted. We are your hosts, Nat and Allie, and we're here to get you super haunted with part 2 of our series on Alfred Loewenstein. But before we get into that, Nat, do you have any personal hauntings to share with us today?
Oh, man. No, you got to go first. Because I was thinking about this, and then I got distracted because I was like, what if we made this cool LGH merch where instead of the LA Dodgers, LA on the hat, it was LGH. And then I was so satisfied with myself for that, I completely forgot the plot of what I'm supposed to be doing. So if you have a personal haunting you would like to share,
I would love to give a shout out to a member of the haunty community who got an LGH tattoo, and it looks so badass. Have you seen this yet, Nat?
Is this the one you texted me like a few weeks ago?
No. I need to give a shout out to that person too. Honestly, let's back up for a minute because I want to give a huge shout out to every single person that's gotten any sort of LGH themed tattoo. Yeah. I think we're up to like 10 people now that have gotten a tattoo inspired by an episode. But this one in particular that I'm thinking of actually has one of our slogans on it. I am going to send you this picture.
That's such a commitment. Now I feel like we really have to keep going. Like we really can never stop because then there's going to be 10 people who are going to have a defunct tattoo. Wow, this tattoo is sick. It is a 8-ball, like the fortune teller 8-ball, not like when you get cocaine in a designated amount. And it says who's to say on the little like triangle thing in there.
I just went back in the tier 2 community chat on Patreon and it looks like the person deleted their message. Oh no, I hope that it wasn't. Maybe because I took so long to talk about it on an intro, maybe they thought we didn't like it. If this is your tattoo, we absolutely love it.
This is sick.
It's amazing. It's incredible.
Oh my God. They deleted it. They were like, honestly, me though, I would be so anxious if I posted like a fan tattoo to a fan board and then it was just like radio silence. I would for sure delete that message. They're probably like in the process of getting like laser tattoo removal right now.
No!
Please don't. We love it.
This is so cool. I hope you're not second guessing your tattoo. I saw this and it made me so happy and so stoked because first of all, it's such a serious decision, or maybe not. Some people don't take it super seriously, which is also way cooler than I could ever be. I'm not a nonchalant person. It's expensive, right? It's expensive. It's time consuming. It's painful, but I love it. It's so fucking cool. Nat and I have small tattoos. Like we said, we both have a number 7 on our ankle.
Yeah.
And even those, they're not cheap. Even if you're drunk at 1 a.m. and you decide to bully someone into giving you a group rate and you can't remember actually at all the tattoo process, but there is a Snapchat of you getting the tattoo and it's just you squirming around on the table singing.
5 hours later.
And also you brought a handle of vodka into the tattoo parlor.
2,000 years later.
What I'm trying to say is getting a tattoo is effort. Yeah. And so we appreciate every single one of you that's gotten an LGH themed tattoo. And this one in particular of the 8-ball that says who's to say is really just, it's amazing.
I like that it has a double meaning too. Like it could be that you just really love cocaine also. And I still do that thing sometimes where I'm driving and I'm like I will magic 8-ball myself. I'll be like, okay, if the light turns green before I count to 10, then that means my answer to this like hypothetical question that I'm thinking about in my head is yes, I'll still do it like correct. Sometimes we're always talking on top of each other, you guys, and it's like I don't know how it's possible. I don't know if we were like in person, if it would be like less talking on top of each other, but I don't think so. And so then sometimes we just make direct eye contact and we both are like deciding, okay, I'm not going to interrupt this person right now, and then it's just quiet, and then we pick the exact same moment to start talking again, and it's just really how you know that we've got the hitchhiker effect. Is that
we're in sync? No, that's still not the hitchhiker effect. Guys, Nat every once in a while will be like, oh yeah, and then this happened. Is that the hitchhiker effect? And it's something that's so not paranormal. Like, oh, I made a sandwich the other day and then I saw that also I had cheese left. Is that the hitchhiker effect? Like, no, bro. I do remember what I was going to say before I got quiet because we both interrupted each other 5 times in a row. I was going to say I can relate to what you're saying about trying to magic 8-ball yourself, because I frequently do that too, where I will be like, you know, if I'm not supposed to do this, then I should get like a really clear sign right now. But then even when I do get a really clear sign, I make the bad decision anyway.
Both today and yesterday.
It's not super helpful.
Look, I'm not a magician, but I do believe that the universe communicates with me through like signs and symbols. I also think that's like the precursor to schizophrenia. So I have to like sort of slow my roll sometimes with it. Because I'm right on the edge there sometimes. I'm like, oh, the bricks are making a formation that I just thought of in my mind. Is that the hitchhiker effect?
It is such a fine line between like, am I just being delusional right now, or is this a sign? And I always just think I'm being delusional. So I will be like, that's clearly not a sign, even though I asked for one. And then I will make the worst decision of my life that has horrible fallout and consequences that I'm still dealing with 7 years later. And then I'll be like, oh, I guess it was a sign.
You know, there's a quote out there that's like, a lesson learned is not a battle lost. It makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Okay.
If you go through something unfortunate and you learn something from it, then it wasn't a total waste. Now, it's very easy to say that for someone who's like a philosopher sitting in their castle on their like stone tablet. But when you're a peasant working in serfdom, it doesn't really hit the same. I'm going to be quite frank with you.
It's a little different.
Would you like to get into episode 216, the story of Alfred Loewenstein, part 2?
Yes, I would. But wait, I just made a connection. Was Alfred Loewenstein Jewish?
So his dad was a German Jewish banker who converted to Catholicism in the 1800s. His mom was, I believe, French Belgian.
Okay. All right. I'll think about it.
Is there a reason? Is there a reason you needed to know this information?
Just curious. Look, sometimes it's helpful to know. Enough said.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe we can bring in our resident Jewish person that we have as a consultant, which is your husband, who wants nothing to do with this show ever.
I already told him about this story, and he was like, what do you mean? He just opened the door and went out? And I was like, yeah, but he couldn't because the wind, the pressure, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then he was like, oh, okay. And I was like, so my thought is that perhaps everyone is lying and that they had a witness who saw him. It was all a plan, right? Like the people at the airport saw him get into the plane and he was like waiting at takeoff, and that was like a plant, right? Or maybe they stopped somewhere else and he parachuted off like some other way. I don't know. Like I feel like everyone was working together because there's no way they wouldn't know how this man got off the plane, right?
And then what did he say in response to that?
He was just like silent. Like I'm pretty sure he lost interest like 5 minutes into the conversation and was already thinking about something else. But you know what? He
pretended to listen at least, and that's all we can expect of non-haunted people. You know, not everyone's cut out for the haunted existential lifestyle. But for those of you who are still listening, I hope that you are interested, because for episode 215, we took you through the rise and fall of Alfred Loewenstein, the third richest man in the world, when he disappeared from his private monoplane in 1928. Today, we'll be taking you through the theories and conspiracies surrounding his bizarre disappearance. But first, we must do a recap of part 1. Nat, what do you remember from part 1 of this series?
Okay, so this guy, Alfred Loewenstein, he's kind of a playboy, wild child type. He's a gambling man, one might say. And he makes a bunch of chaotic decisions that somehow land him to be the third richest man in the world at the time. And he is married to some woman. It seems like she comes from a lot of money. She has like a socialite sort of background. So he's like new money coming onto the scene. And he gets on his monoplane. He has this private plane. He's a very eccentric character because in 1928, not a lot of people had private planes at all. And so there's one pilot that basically is the pilot for all of the famous people with private planes at this time. And he's like a really well-respected pilot. Everyone uses him. He's got 2 stenographers, and a stenographer is like someone who just takes notes of what you're saying, I guess. This is before they had like Notes app and stuff like that. He is just constantly followed around by these stenographers, and he's constantly coming up with strange ideas. People love him or hate him. He's a very polarizing figure. And he goes onto this plane one day. He's going from London to Brussels in Belgium. So he has to pass over a little bit of water there. And while he's on his monoplane, apparently, according to his staff, like his crew that's on the plane with him, he was reading a book. He gets up to go to the bathroom. He goes to the bathroom, and then a lot of time passes and he doesn't come out of the bathroom. So then they start banging on the bathroom door like, hey, come out. And when they open the bathroom door, there's no one there. And it's even more sketch because then they're like, oh my God, holy shit, like we lost him. They look all over the plane. They can't find him. They like get the pilot's attention and they're like, this is an emergency. We have lost our employer. And for some reason, the pilots decide to do a U-turn, go land at this like little island that's actually a French military base. And then when they get onto the island, it's like an emergency landing on wet sand. And so everyone on the island is like, who the fuck is this? And they like all pull out their guns and stuff. And they're like, what's your fucking problem? They basically like apprehend all of these people, and they're all kind of, you know, skirting around the issue. They don't want to say that they work for Alfred Loewenstein, but they're like, our employer went missing. And they're giving these stories, and it just seems like they're all in shock, and some of the details aren't adding up. The vibe is like that something's being hidden, or that perhaps these people are just in shock. We don't know. Then I think that's where we left it at, right?
That was great. The only correction that I would say is it wasn't an island that they landed on. It was just a beach. It was a beach on the coast of France near Dunkirk, and it was super suspicious because it's not like there was anything wrong with the plane. So they didn't need to make an emergency landing. The pilot should have followed protocol and landed at the nearest airport. There was an airport that could have had the ability to help them sooner than the outcome that they chose.
I remember one more thing. Okay. Also, right before you ended the episode, you said that there was a witness who claimed that they saw a man parachute into a yacht. But then also, oh, I forgot about this. You guys, it got so juicy. Oh my God. It was like Game of Thrones. I forgot about. Okay. So then after this bitch dies, the dude dies or supposedly dies, his wife tries to get his assets. Like she's trying to use their money or whatever, you know, she's still alive. So she needs like bills to pay and stuff. They have all these estates and whatever that she has wait staff and stuff to pay. And all of her assets have been frozen because her husband has not actually been declared dead. He's like a missing person at this point. So in order for him to be declared dead, they need to find the body, but he's like missing in international waters somewhere. And so then she puts out like a bounty. Whoever can find his body will get like a large sum of money. And then a fisherman finds like a really decayed corpse. It was so badly decayed that you couldn't even recognize it. So we have no idea if it was actually Alfred Loewenstein or not, but the corpse was wearing leather shoes, silk boxers, and a watch. And the watch had Alfred Loewenstein with his address engraved on it. And that is kind of a fishy detail because I don't know how they did things in the 20s. Maybe you did put your address on stuff. I don't know. I know the like Return to Tiffany's lockets are kind of a play on that old tradition of engraving. So maybe it was normal to put your address on there, but it also just seems like the perfect way to collect a bounty or to fulfill some other conspiracy where you need a body to get your assets unfrozen. And then at the funeral, the family didn't even show up. The wife didn't show up. And they buried this supposed Alfred Loewenstein in a unmarked grave.
Perfect.
Like no headstone.
It's such a weird story. So the bullet points, which Nat hit on every single one of them, is that Alfred Loewenstein was 51 years old in 1928. That's the year he went missing. He was on a routine flight from London to Brussels on his private monoplane. It was flying over the English Channel, which is part of the Atlantic Ocean. He had 6 employees with him, which consisted of the pilot, pilot, the pilot's mechanic, 2 stenographers, Loewenstein's valet, and his male secretary. Loewenstein was said to have been reading a book silently before excusing himself to use the restroom, but when he didn't return from the bathroom after about 10 to 15 minutes, his valet went to go check on him and discovered that the bathroom was empty. The pilot, Donald Drew, ignored protocol and landed on a beach near Dunkirk in France instead of landing at the nearest airport, which actually would have been closer if he had just landed at the nearest airport. The beach that he landed on was actually French military property, so after they got off the plane, they were handcuffed. Everybody was taken in to be questioned. The police came, and it took over half an hour for any employee to say what had happened to their employer. They had no problem saying that their employer had gone missing, but either you believe that they were too nervous and in shock to complete full sentences, or maybe they were trying to delay help in case Loewenstein was still alive, depending on if you think he was murdered, went missing, or something else. And we're going to go into all the theories in just a second. But once the French police did realize that they were dealing with the 3rd richest man in the world who had gone missing, they made a super strange decision. And they basically said, not our problem. We're not going to look for him because technically he probably disappeared over international waters. So we're not going to even look at all. Then the British police decided the same thing, which is super weird because Loewenstein, remember, he had several mansions in different countries. One of them was in England. That's where he had this super big house that he had purchased the adjacent property and turned it into a riding school. He was really into racehorses and gambling. So he had a whole riding school there where he would hand pick horses, jockeys, breeders to come in.
So cool.
He and his son, Bobby, I know, I knew you would like that. He and his son, Bobby, would go out there all the time together and take care of the horses and ride them. There's all these pictures of them in like old-timey riding gear together on these beautiful racehorses.
I feel like that, like, I'm not even mad at this guy because he spent his money the way you should if you're like uber rich, you know? Like, I hate how like the super rich people now, they don't even spend their money on cool stuff. Yes, you should have a riding school. Like, you should have a private plane with stenographers. Like, you should be doing all of this weird stuff. You should be inventing new fabrics and stuff.
I think he definitely was using his money in a way that got him the well-deserved reputation of being kind of a hard partying playboy, which we talked about a little bit last episode. And we're going to go into some more wild stories. There's so many weird tabloids about the escapades that he got into during the time that he was still alive. But the reason why I mention the mansions in these different countries is that typically when somebody goes missing, if they're a citizen of a country or if they are a significant property owner in a country, you would think that that country would want to find the guy.
Yeah.
You know, like this is the 3rd wealthiest man in the world. So you think
His political
countries and
ties.
police forces, he has political ties. You think they would be like, give it to us. We want to be the ones in charge of the case. But instead, the opposite happened. The French police said, not our problem. The British police said, not our problem. And the Belgian police also said, not our problem. Wow. So what ended up happening is there was really no formal investigation to figure out what happened to Loewenstein or even to find his body, which probably contributed to the whole mystery that happened today. It was sort of the perfect storm where now we're just left to speculate because there was no formal inquest into his death. Also, as a consequence of the police not wanting to get involved, Alfred's wife, Madeleine, eventually showed up on scene and made it her #1 priority to find his corpse because Belgian law, remember, she has ties to the Masson family in Belgium, very wealthy, affluent family. And her first move is, hey, I'm going to go to the judge in Belgium and I'm going to try to get my husband's assets transferred to me because obviously he's dead. He's gone missing, presumed deceased. But Belgium law says without a corpse or proof that the person is actually dead, we are going to freeze their assets. We're not just going to automatically transfer them because we don't know what happened. Maybe he just is on a bender and is going to show back up in a week. And so there's no point for us to start dissolving his estate and redistributing his assets when we don't even know what happened. Right. So she's in kind of this tough spot because the police aren't investigating. His assets are frozen. Remember that their mansions generate $500,000 in expenses each month.
That's crazy.
So she's going to be homeless. Like the homes are going to go into foreclosure. All of the businesses are being like frozen. All the assets are being frozen. So employees aren't being paid, etc. So she offers a reward to any fisherman that can find her husband's body. Now, obviously, a lot of fishermen are super interested in this because this is the third wealthiest man in the world. This could be a big come up for them. So there are all of these fishing vessels that are out in the English Channel looking for the body, and one boat captain ends up finding what he says is Loewenstein's body. Now, the body is so badly decomposed that it cannot be identified visually. The face is kind of disintegrated. The clothes are pretty much all gone. His shoes allegedly are still attached to him, and so are his boxers, which I kind of feel like is a lie. I think probably they just said that to preserve his dignity. I think probably it was missing.
They were like, I didn't want to leave in the detail that his penis had been chewed off and his butthole had been enlarged by a large starfish who had taken up house in his rectum. And they're like, no, we don't need those kind of details. He's like, his sockets, his eyes, they had been fucked in by worms.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. You brush your teeth and hair, you walk your dog, you put on skincare and make yourself dinner. But what are you doing for your mental health? Being an earthbound human in the Milky Way galaxy is difficult, and our primitive society has yet to fully recognize just how important it is to pay attention to things beyond the physical realm. So let's talk numbers. Traditional in-person therapy can cost anywhere from $100 to $250 per session, which adds up fast. But with BetterHelp Online Therapy, you can save an average of up to 50% per session. Therapy should feel accessible, not like a luxury reserved for the ruling class. With online therapy, you get quality care at a price that makes sense and can help you with anything from anxiety to everyday stress. Therapy is helpful for so many reasons, but for me, it's been great to use as a sounding board. I mean, I love my friends, but we're not the most well-adjusted bunch, so therapy has been a great tool to use when working through my own personal hauntings. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 5 million people globally. Your well-being is worth it. Visit betterhelp.com/gethaunted to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/gethaunted to get 10% off your first month, or just check out the show notes. And now back to your regularly scheduled haunting.
Like, no, this is actually, we've got enough evidence already. Actually, I will say my husband did offer his own insight because I was like, yeah, but the guy still had his watch on. Doesn't that sound like fake? And he was like, well, no, I think maybe your watch could stay on. And I was like, but from 4,000 feet, like you're essentially hitting concrete, you know?
Yes.
Yeah, like the water is, you're hitting concrete from that high up. And he was just kind of like, again, lost interest when I followed up. I don't know. The man is kind of like into watches, kind of not. So who knows if we can trust him or not.
I mean, there definitely have been examples of bodies that show up like in the ocean and get identified via their watch. I was just listening to a podcast the other day. I forget the name of it. If you guys know what it is, leave it in the comments below because it's really good. It's put on by, I think, the Canadian Broadcast Radio Network or something. They actually randomly have some pretty good true crime anthologies. So they'll follow one case for like a year. And there is a case where a guy was identified via his watch in England, I believe. But the difference is he didn't fall 4,000 feet from an airplane. He was killed and then his body was dumped over a ship. So I do think it's weird. I agree with you, especially because the autopsy that Madeline would eventually pay for after her husband's body was supposedly found by this fisherman, she pays for this autopsy, and the autopsy says every single bone in this man's body was broken. Every single bone. So basically the only reason why the corpse was somewhat intact is because of the skin. The bones were not doing anything to keep the form or shape of his hands or wrists. So to your point, I do think it's kind of fishy, no pun intended, that the watch was still attached, because if you had broken every single bone in your hand and wrist and arm from a fall like that, wouldn't the watch, which had a leather band, wouldn't that eventually come off?
Yeah, leather? How long was it between him falling out of the plane, allegedly, and this corpse being found? Like, how much time had passed?
Thursday, July 19th at around 4:20 p.m., a corpse was found bobbing in the Atlantic Ocean 10 miles off of France's coast. So he went missing on the 4th of July and his body was found the 19th of July.
Okay, yeah, I mean, That seems reasonable to me. I was going to say, if it's been like a long time, you would think that leather would probably decay or something. But I don't know. Now it's kind of sounding reasonable. Like, how else would you get a corpse with every single bone in its body broken? Unless they pushed someone else from the top, unless there was already a corpse, like in the airplane.
Well, the autopsy was sealed. Remember, it was a private autopsy that Madeline paid for. It took an uncharacteristically long amount of time. Usually autopsies, it was a quick turnaround, especially for a super wealthy person, like maybe a week tops. This took them 2 months, and they released the bare minimum information to the press and sealed the rest. Because remember, there was no police investigation, so there's no like freedom of information for anybody.
So this could have all just been bullshit, right? Like,
Yes.
we have no way
Yes.
to verify that this was like a legit autopsy or not.
Correct. Yeah.
There's never been a formal
So-
investigation until Aly took the case.
And then Madeline, once she gets Alfred's death certificate, she, like I said, she sends the body out for a private autopsy, holds a funeral that she doesn't go to, and then her husband gets buried in an unmarked grave. Now, the reason why we're spending so much time going back over some of these details is because they're super relevant once we get into these theories and try to figure out which one seems the most likely. We need to be aware of all of the different details surrounding the death. Now, I also wanted to do a very quick recap of some of the photos and maps that are relevant to the story because, like I said, I do think all of this information is needed to get to the bottom of what happened to Alfred Loewenstein. So, Nat, I'm going to go ahead and send you some pictures.
Okay, Alfred Loewenstein. This is a photo that looks like it was taken out of an old-timey newspaper, and it's black and white. You have a man who is looking very 1920s. You know, he's got like what looks like a wool coat, you know, a necktie, and he looks very old-timey. And his hair is kind of like gelled down. He looks very like somber, sort of serious. At the top it says, Captain Alfred Loewenstein. Opening the wrong door of his compartment on a London to Brussels airplane, Captain Alfred Loewenstein, world-famous Belgian financier, stepped into space Wednesday and was drowned when he fell into the sea.
Thank you. Okay, so now I want you to click on the next image. And this one is a diagram of the monoplane and where everyone was supposedly sitting at the time that he disappeared. And I wanted to point this out to you because one of the theories, the very first theory we're going to be discussing, is that this was just a tragic accident. He mistook the door to outside the plane for the door back inside the plane and opened it up after using the bathroom and stepped out. But there's a lot of controversy about this theory for many, many reasons we'll get into in a little bit. But I specifically want you to zoom in on the back of the plane.
Yeah.
Shows the door to outside, and it also shows where the lavatory compartment is. The lavatory is completely separate. So you have one door that goes into the bathroom. But when you open the door from the bathroom, you can either turn to the right to go back into the main compartment of the plane, or you can go straight to exit the plane. Do you see that?
Yeah, I see that. Basically, think of like two closets next to each other, or they're calling this little space in front of the bathroom a lobby. So there's like a lobby that goes out to the outside. So there's a door there, and then it's almost like an airlock.
As you notice, the door, when open, closes off the section of the main compartment. When the door is closed, it just closes the door to the bathroom, basically. So it's the same door. It just swings back and forth. So when he opened the door from the restroom, he would have been visible to the people sitting in the main compartment. You see what I'm saying? Because it's all one door.
Yeah.
So unless he like fully slammed the door shut to the main compartment, which everyone should have noticed if that was true, then there's no way for him to have mixed up the doors.
Why is this called a monoplane? I know that doesn't seem like relevant, so I didn't ask before, but now I fear that the time to ask the question is passing up and I'll never understand.
A monoplane is called that because it features a single set of wings on the fuselage, in contrast to a biplane, which has two sets of wings. So a biplane would be what the Wright brothers flew. You know, how it had like the upper wings and the lower wings. A monoplane only has one set of wings.
I mean, yeah, now we would just call that a plane, right?
Yeah.
We don't really have biplanes. Maybe we do.
Anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think I think we've gotten more efficient. Okay.
Someone's commenting commenting right now. They're like, actually, I have a biplane, as they like adjust their monocle. Wow, Allie, this is a very beautiful photo dump. I know I commented that on the actual photo dump, but I stand by what I said. Allie had put a lot of work into this, you guys. So make sure that you also comment that this is a beautiful photo dump. Okay.
Thank
you. I see a bunch of X's on a map that's showing I guess, is that the English Channel? Is that what that like space is called between France and, okay. Yeah, it's an X on London. Plane takes off after 6 p.m. And then there's an X over Dover. It says plane flies over Dover without incident. Dover is on the very tip of the island that is the UK. And then it's got another X that looks like, yeah, it's kind of close to the shore of France, and it says body found ? And then there's an X over Dunkirk, which is looks far away from where the body was found, and it says pilot lands here. And then it said pilot should have made emergency landing here, closer to where the body was found, the airport. It says Aerodrome de Saint-Nicolas-vers-le-Fa. I don't know. It's in French, but that's where Allie believes the pilot should have made an emergency landing. This is very thoughtful. I don't see how anyone could argue about this map.
Thank you. And this is Donald Drew, who like kind of seems like he should have been a model and not a plane, and possibly just like a plant. But if you want to describe him.
Yeah, so we have a picture of a man, and it says his name is Captain Drew, who was piloting Captain Loewenstein's plane from Croydon to Brussels. But he looks really young to me. Like he looks like 19, maybe. I would be surprised if this person was like over 23 years old. He looks very young, and he kind of has like slicked back hair. He's wearing an aviator jacket with the collar popped, and yeah, he's sort of giving like a very demure look.
He is super young. He's in his 20s when this happens, and he was a military pilot. So he was definitely very well versed in emergencies, how to operate under pressure, and plane procedure, which just makes the fact that he landed on the beach instead of the aerodrome that much more suspicious. The next picture shows 3 different family photos. The top one has Loewenstein exiting a very nice black private car, walking with his entourage, basically. Now, the guy to the left of Loewenstein, so Loewenstein's in the very front wearing the newsboy cap. He's kind of on the shorter, stockier side. The guy to our left, if you're looking at the photo, that is Arthur Hodgson, who is Loewenstein's right-hand man. That's described as like his closest confidant. It's his male secretary. This guy's in his mid-30s. He's got a mustache, very well put together on the taller side. Then if you look underneath at the other 2 photos, we have a picture of Loewenstein with Bobby on their horses. Wow. And then to the right is another picture of Bobby in his teens.
Okay. Yeah, I see it. I will say about these horse photos that whoever's sitting on the white horse is sitting too far back in the saddle, and they do not have a good seat. And you can actually see that the horse is frustrated because that is not a comfortable position for the horse. And I disagree with that person now. They seem not trustworthy to me.
Well, that's a child. That's Bobby as a child. So it does make sense, I guess, that he's seated wrong. But thank you for that insight, because maybe then they were just casual horse enthusiasts and not really like true equestrians. They just had the money to have horses. Tale as old as time. And then I want you to click to the very, very last photo that says people inside the plane. Okay.
Yeah, I see that. Oh, wow. Who's that fucking caked up there? Robert Little? Holy shit.
Robert Little has a badonk on him.
It's okay, guys, I'm looking at a diagram. It says people inside the plane, and then there's like 7 little photos with their names underneath, and everyone's got a photo or an image in there, but Roberts is like literally not even his face. Like he's just standing looking backwards with his legs spread slightly, and he's cheeked the fuck up, double cheeked up. So
I was like, damn nigga, what you doing out here with all this ass? Double cheeked up on a Thursday afternoon.
I don't know what, is that the only picture of him that exists?
The only one I could find. I spent hours looking on newspapers.com, and this is the only one that I could find. I'm not even 100% sure it is him, because like I said, Loewenstein is so infamous that there are so many articles that have contradicting information about him and what happened to him. And that's what also makes it really frustrating when trying to solve this mystery. But I'm pretty sure that's Robert Little, the plane mechanic. Donald Drew, we know that's him because that's his military photo. And then Arthur Hodgson, like I said, he was known for wearing this kind of fedora hat. He had a nice little mustache, wears this suit. Fred Baxter is the valet, so he's super easy to pick out in any picture that you can find. He's always in the background holding luggage. And he's described as being really short, like a jockey. In one of the books I read, it said that he was like a super sweet young man, very like short, very simple. He's described as being simple, like kind of this was a come up for him having this job because he came from a not wealthy background. And if he had been wealthier, people speculate that he might have become a horse jockey because he had the perfect build. So I think that's why he's described as being like that. And then Eileen and Paula, unfortunately, maybe because they were women, maybe because they just didn't want anyone to know what they looked like, they gave very few statements to the press, and they also have no published photos that I could find. And then Alfred Loewenstein is at the very bottom of this diagram. Now, the last picture I want you to find, I'd like you to look at the picture of Madeline Loewenstein.
Yeah, I see her. Honestly, yeah, this is like a drawing or an illustration, and she's got that 1920s hair. It's like the really short bob with the curled bob that's maybe chin length, maybe even a little shorter than chin length. And she's got one of those hats on that's like Daisy from The Great Gatsby. I don't even know it's like a bowler hat, but it probably like ties in the back. It's like a mix between a bonnet and a hat. And then she's got a scarf and covering her neck. And like it looks like a lady's suit on, or perhaps it's just a jacket of some sort.
She looks like she has a long face, a long chin. She's got a beauty mark between her nose and her upper lip, and then another beauty mark underneath her bottom lip. She has short hair. Yeah, very 1920s vibes for sure. Old money vibes is how I would describe her. Yes, this is his wife.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely married for money. Like, this is not a hot girl that a rich man would marry. This was clearly like an influence type thing, like a power couple. I don't know, because when I think of who your wife is going to be when you're like a super rich playboy, it's probably going to be a like really hot younger person, not someone who looks like they could be your teacher. Yeah, I mean, she's not ugly. She's just not, she's not giving like 1920s bimbo, you know?
Yeah, no, and I actually don't think it's wrong to say that, because I think it's relevant that they married only for the status, you know?
Yeah.
Like, she married so that she could be taken care of, which is understandable as a woman in the 1920s. She had a name that she could give him so that it was easier for him to have connections and become successful. If you think that she's not in on it, then maybe it makes sense that she didn't really care to figure out what happened to him, because maybe they just didn't have much of a relationship in general. You know what I mean? Like,
maybe he wasn't even attracted to women. I didn't even think about that, but maybe he wasn't attracted to women, so he's just marrying a woman to like, okay, look, I'm, married, so everyone can like stop asking questions about my personal life.
A lot of what we know about Alfred's life is rumor and gossip, because he is so infamous that everyone is talking about him during the time that he's alive. And there were some rumors that he may have been in a relationship with Arthur Hodgson, his right-hand man, his male secretary. And I think the reason why people were kind of fixated on the possibility of him being in a relationship with this guy is because it was sort of unusual to have a male secretary at the time, and also Arthur was his closest friend. The counterpoint to that might be, is it gay to have a close friend?
I knew you were going to say that. Fella, is it gay to have friends? Is it gay to have friends? Kinda. Gay to have hot friends like that. Alfred Hodgson, I don't know if it's just because he's like in every photo like showing his jaw and you can't see his eyes, so you just like assume he's hotter than he is, because that's what happens when you cover up your eyes. So maybe it's that with the fedora thing, but he is wearing a fedora. He is tall, he is sleek, and he is the richest man in the world's right-hand man. I think maybe even if he wasn't gay, if he wasn't attracted to men, I could be attracted to anyone if they could turn my life around for the better, you know? I mean, this is 1928. We're talking about life is hard. Like, if you fall and get a bruise, you might die. So it helps to be under the good graces of someone who's invested in your life being prolonged, you know? Like, if you're someone's lover who's rich and wealthy, they're not going to let you fail. So maybe, you know, maybe they were gay is what I'm saying.
I take really good care of my teeth, but when I'm asleep, I involuntarily clench, grind, and chatter them, which has led to jaw pain, headaches, and even a cracked molar. If you're part of the 30% of Americans who, like me, grind their teeth, then your smile needs protection. And there's no better solution than REMI's custom fit night guard. Both dentists and teeth grinders alike recommend REMI because a custom fit night guard is the best way to protect your teeth. And REMI is 80% less than the dentist and way easier. So here's how it works. REMI sends your impression kit straight to your door with step-by-step instructions to get your perfect impression. Then you send them back your impressions and they ship you back your custom fit night guard so you can get straight into protecting your teeth. How easy is that? The best part is REMI is so confident you'll get a perfect fit that they offer a 45-night perfect fit guarantee or your money back. No waiting rooms, no overpriced bills, just a better way to protect your teeth while you sleep. Try REMI risk-free at shopremi.com/haunted and use code HAUNTED to get up to 50% off your night guard at checkout. That's 50% off at shopremi.com/haunted with code HAUNTED. Thanks, REMI, for sponsoring this week's episode. And now back to your regularly scheduled haunting. Yeah, or to your point, maybe Arthur was taking advantage of his employer's attraction to him by gaining his trust in order to perhaps arrange his death. We don't know. But it is something that is kind of a footnote in a few articles and books that I read. So I figured since you brought it up, we might as well mention it because it might be relevant. So moving on to the theories and conspiracies. It's been almost 100 years since Loewenstein's strange death, but the public is no closer to coming to a conclusion on the circumstances surrounding his demise than they were when he first disappeared from his monoplane almost 100 years ago today. In his book, The Man Who Fell from the Sky, author and journalist William Morris wrote of his own thought process as he began investigating the story of Loewenstein for the very first time. Quote, "How could a man so prominent, so rich and famous, die violently without any trace of an official investigation? If he had committed suicide, what had driven him to such desperation? Could it have been murder? If so, who had the means and motive? An accident then? But how do you accidentally step out of an aircraft in mid-flight without any of your fellow passengers noticing? The detached attitude of the police, who hardly figured in the stories at all, was curious to say the least. Nor did it seem that Loewenstein's associates had been anxious to do anything more than staunch the financial bleeding that followed his disappearance. There was certainly no indication that they wanted to find out how he had died. Quite the reverse. Reading between the lines, there was the distinct impression that an embarrassment had been removed from their stead, stiff-colored world of banking. Good riddance to him, end quote. If the best journalists, authors, and detectives haven't been able to come to any definitive conclusions, then why would we, Let's Get Haunted, be any different? Well, here at LGH, we're not in the business of trying to figure out what happened. We're just in the business of entertainment. So we're going to look at all of these theories and then at the very end of the episode say what we believe to have taken place that fateful day. The theories for what happened to Alfred Loewenstein can be divided into 5 categories, beginning with the more benign and ending with the most unhinged. Let us begin. Theory number 1, an accident. This theory alleges that Alfred Loewenstein fell out of his monoplane accidentally. While all proponents of this theory agree on this point, that it was an accident, there are several arguments over how the accident might have occurred. Prior to his death, there are several sources that state that friends and family of Alfred Loewenstein had been concerned about his, quote, increasing absent-mindedness leading up to the accident. Rumors of Alfred's long work days taking a toll on his mental acuity were not uncommon, but when pressed for specific examples, hardly anyone could find any. One article published to the Chronicle in July of 1928 explores this theory. The headline reads, "Captain Loewenstein, most absent-minded man," and an anonymous source is quoted as saying, quote, "A London financial associate of the Millionaire says Captain Loewenstein was the most absent-minded man in the world. When planning schemes, he did not look at what he was doing or where he was going. He had walked from a conference table into a telephone box and banged his head against the wall before he realized his mistake," end quote. Another unsubstantiated rumor said that when flying in his airplane, he had on at least one occasion opened the door and held on to the rails inside the plane while he looked out at the sea below. However, this is just one source by an anonymous person, so it's impossible to know if this was the truth or not. Indeed, some speculate that these rumors may have actually started over fears that Alfred would have the same fate as his father, who lost all his wealth and died after exhibiting erratic behavior that led to unwise business decisions. Could these rumors of Alfred's absent-mindedness actually have started over someone just expressing fear or worry that Alfred would meet the same fate as his father? If such a rumor was started, it's easy to see how it could snowball over time until eventually it was out of control. But putting doubts aside over the possibilities of some sort of early onset dementia, most people who believe Loewenstein's death was just an accident point to Occam's razor, where the simplest explanation is usually the right one. The fact is that there were two doors, one that led into the restroom and one that led from inside the plane to the outside of the plane. Therefore, people who believe this was an accident argue, isn't it more likely that Alfred simply got confused after going to the bathroom and pushed open the wrong door, stepping out into the air and falling to his death by accident? But people who disagree with this theory point out that the investigation into his death determined that due to the pressure of outside air, it would have been impossible for him to open the door by himself. But what if conditions were perfect? Isn't it plausible that it could have just been a freak accident? Author William Morris doesn't think that this is likely. In his book, he says that it would have been almost impossible to confuse the door to outside the plane with the door to inside the plane because the door to the outside had a circular window in it that showed the sky and clouds passing by. But still, many skeptics find this to be the most likely action that led to Alfred's death. In a momentary lapse of judgment, with perfect weather conditions, Alfred could have mistaken the door with the circular window in it for the door that led back to his chair and, stepping forward, plunged into darkness into the water below.
I mean, I think it is plausible, right? Like that door looks, I don't know. It does, yeah, it could happen. But then wouldn't everybody in the plane notice like the pressure change? And I know that planes weren't as fast in the olden days as they are now. So it'd probably be less pressure change or whatever. I don't know if that's true or not. I need someone else to tell me if that's true. But yeah, I just feel like people would know. But maybe it used to be so loud. I remember my dad told me like flying used to be like really loud and it would take a long time to get somewhere. So it wasn't that comfortable to fly. I mean, it was better than, taking a bus or whatever. But he was like, that's why airlines used to have, these elaborate dinners and you would have lobster and smoke cigarettes and stuff on the plane because it was to pass the time. So you wouldn't like care that it was taking forever and you were, it's really loud if you were drunk and like eating well and partying or whatever. So maybe it was loud enough on that plane with the prop that they wouldn't notice it, but I don't know. I also know everyone back then used to, be like half alive anyways because they were battling all kinds of brain worms or whatever. Anyways, who knows? Maybe everyone is undergoing so much trauma from various wars and just the chaos of life that they're exposed to all the time that they're just like, oh yeah, like the pressure in here changed. Okay, maybe they didn't notice it, but I don't know. That's my thought.
I'm glad you brought up the noise because something that is relevant is that, like you said, planes are very noisy. But remember, Alfred had specifically retrofitted his airplane to be kind of a working office. And part of those modifications that he made included included soundproofing. Now, I don't know what soundproof technology was like back in the day, but it was said that he wanted to make sure that everyone could hear each other from inside the body of the aircraft, but he also wanted to make sure that anybody in the cockpit couldn't hear some of the business dealings that he was making in the back. So he had a partition of glass between the pilot and mechanic and the rest of the plane. That partition was soundproofed. The fact that it was soundproofed means that it's even more impossible that nobody would have noticed if he opened the door to outside the plane. Because if you open the door to outside the plane, that soundproof is now broken, right? And you should be able to hear the engines, you should be able to hear the wind roaring past, and possibly somebody screaming, maybe, as they realize they've made a horrible mistake and are now falling. And even if you couldn't hear the screaming, you would 100% be able to feel the pressure change and the wind blowing in. There were multiple experiments that had been done by the maker of the airplane. The manufacturer of the airplane, Fokker, were super invested in trying to figure out what happened, because remember, this was the latest model of airplane that they had. And they were actually gearing up for an aviation show that they were going to have where rich people could come in and look at their latest monoplanes on the show floor and figure out if they wanted one or not. So when this accident happened, they're like, holy shit, our plane was involved. We need to figure out, is the door faulty? Can it just fall off? Can it open? Can it, maybe you do only need one person to get it open and we've made a terrible error here. But what they found through all of these investigations and experiments that they did is that they had to have 2 super strong mechanics go up into the plane in order to get the door open at all. And even then, they could only get it open a couple of inches before it would slam back shut because of the air pressure and the wind and the force coming from the engines of the monoplane, which are on, there are 2 of them on that side of the plane.
Okay, but let me ask you this. If there were 2 men, one a little stockier, one a little shorter, one a little taller, one a little broader, and they were both super focused on each other, looking deep into each other's eyes as they made sweet, sweet love, would the strength of their love be able to open up that door?
Through love, anything is possible.
Maybe they were fucking, you know, like maybe they were doing stuff.
Oh.
And
they were fucking in the bathroom and the door
Yeah.
popped open.
Yeah.
And that's why everyone's being so weird about it, because they don't want to say that that's what was happening.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, maybe we've come up with another theory. Well, and that would still fall under the umbrella of an accident.
And then
it's not like they were trying to fuck each other to death. It just happened.
And then it would make sense why the wife and everyone didn't show up to the funeral. And it would make sense why they didn't put his name on the headstone, because she was like, yeah, this guy was never the one. Maybe she was like, I thought I married this rich guy and he loved me, and someone finally didn't think that I was not hot enough to be this rich, and then I was proven wrong because actually he was more interested in business, and by business I mean his right-hand man.
And remember that Fokker was not the only company to do experiments after this accident happened. The UK Air Ministry also had a vested interest in figuring out what was going on because they're in charge of the safety of air travel. So even though there was no formal inquest by the police into the disappearance of Loewenstein, the UK Air Ministry's chief inspector also did a similar experiment and sent people up 4,000 feet in the air into a Fokker monoplane to try to figure out if they could get it open or not. And in that experiment, it failed and nobody was able to get the door open.
Yeah, but can
So
we
even
even
if you're
trust
feeling-
these experiments because they're paid for by a company who would benefit from the experiments showing that there is not a way to open the door?
So the reason why I include the second example is because I think it's super easy to write off the Fokker experiment because they want to reassure their rich clientele that their planes are safe in the same way that we talked about the Bayesian super yacht sinking, where of course the maker of that boat is going to say it's unsinkable. Why would they say, what's the alternative? Like, this is super unsafe and you should never buy our yachts. Like, nobody's going to say that. So the UK Air Ministry is supposed to be a neutral third party, and all they do, they're kind of like the FAA. They're just trying to go in and figure out what happened and how to make it safer moving forward, but they concluded that it was impossible to get the door open. So they're like, well, no changes need to be made to anything because there's nothing wrong with the airplane. However, again, this is the 1920s, and there are some, less than savory ways that a rich businessman or a rich company could maybe pay someone off to say that. So we could still think there's some conspiracy here and that it was an accident, and it's just that nobody wanted to say it was an accident. But then you have to remember that in Canada, there were also people who were really curious about this and started doing their own experiments that were involved in aviation to see if it was unsafe for people to be going up in these monoplanes and flying at 4,000 feet. And one expert that weighed in said, quote, any person wishing to get out of the door, which opens towards the motors, would have to push a piece of woodwork roughly 10 square feet in area against a slipstream of 120 plus miles an hour, assisted by the backwash of two 150 horsepower motors. The backwash of these alone is enough to knock a man down when standing on the ground. And even if a man could get the door open, a super strong man, as soon as the pressure was released, the door would slam back shut and his body would be caught and held fast in the closing door. Furthermore, as soon as the outside door was opened even the slightest inch, everyone inside would be aware of it, and a blast of wind would blow throughout the entire cabin, disrupting paperwork and making it very obvious that something had happened. It is impossible, supposing that a man did leap from the machine, that the passengers inside the cabin should not know that something had happened, end quote. So that's a neutral third-party guy from Canada that has no stake in Fokker, no stake in the UK Air Ministry, and no stake in any of Loewenstein's businesses, saying that he feels it's impossible. But that guy was not involved, so who knows? Maybe he's just saying random shit. We all know somebody that's kind of a know-it-all. They have a very niche hobby, and they just want to be kind of the guy that comes in and is like, no, you're all wrong. This is why. So maybe he's actually not credible because of that. So that's the most common theory on what happened to Alfred, but let's look at some other ideas that fall under the category of accident that are a little more out there. There were also reports that Alfred was extremely jealous of Charles Lindbergh. Nat, do you know who Charles Lindbergh was?
No. Who is that?
He was an American aviator, inventor, and author, best known for making the first solo non-stop flight across the Atlantic Ocean when, in 1927, he flew a custom-built single-engine monoplane called the Spirit of St. Louis from New York to Paris. While this was certainly an impressive feat, in modern times, Lindbergh is probably best remembered as the victim of one of the most highly publicized crimes of the 20th century when his son was kidnapped and murdered in 1932. And that story is often called the story of the Lindbergh baby. So if you've ever heard anyone talk about that before, that's who they're talking about. This guy, Charles Lindbergh, was wealthy. He was an aviator. He was kind of an adrenaline junkie. He was breaking world records that had to do with flying because remember, flying was still super new at this time, which you pointed out last episode. However, at the time that today's story takes place, the murder of the Lindbergh baby had not happened yet because remember, Loewenstein goes missing in 1928 and Lindbergh's baby doesn't get kidnapped until 1932. Lindbergh is still super famous at this point, even though the kidnapping of his child would kind of put him into pop culture even today, pop culture relevance. So in an article for the Evening Express, the rumors of Loewenstein's jealousy of Lindbergh are explored, saying, quote, crossing the Atlantic alone in a plane made Lindbergh so popular that for the moment, everyone forgot about Loewenstein, and he began to look for someone else to perform a similar stunt with himself as the passenger. End quote. According to newspaper cuttings, Loewenstein was advised by a doctor that he was not well enough to try to beat Lindbergh's record, so instead he paid somebody else $250,000 to do the flight. This was a man named Charles Levine, and he beat Lindbergh's record, becoming the first non-stop flight passenger to make a transatlantic flight.
Oh, that's very hater, petty. Yeah.
Petty, for sure. That's exactly what I have on the next bullet point. I said, this is a super petty story, right? And it leads many people to wonder, might a jealous and emboldened Loewenstein have devised a new daring stunt? One that would have blown Lindbergh's fame out of the water and brought Loewenstein back into the forefront of global news? Maybe he never intended to die and instead had something else planned, like a free-falling or parachute leap that went terribly wrong. This might also explain why the passengers in the plane acted so suspiciously upon landing and why they didn't want to give up many details at first. However, we have to remember that, to be fair, no parachute was found with Loewenstein's supposed body. But it was a long time between the time he was found and his body was found, and remember, his clothing had already come off of his corpse, so maybe the parachute had also shaken loose?
That makes sense, and there was a witness, supposedly, who said they saw a man parachuting down towards a yacht.
There was a witness who gave a news report, who gave an interview to a newspaper saying, hey, I'm a fisherman. I was on the water that day in the English Channel, and I saw a monoplane fly overhead. It was loud, so I looked up and I watched it go, pass over me. And then I saw a parachute coming down from the monoplane. I thought it was weird, so I kept watching. And then I saw a super fancy yacht speed over to where the parachute was landing. And then it looked like the guy with the parachute got into the yacht and then sped away. But if we believe that guy, then I think that this theory of an accident doesn't make sense. And I also think the idea that he was trying to break Lindbergh's record or do some sort of public stunt that would put him over the top of Lindbergh isn't, we can't believe that theory if we believe that he survived the fall, right? Because if he survived the fall, he would have come out and been like, hey guys, look, I survived the fall, or I parachuted from 4,000 feet just because I can, and I had a yacht come get me, and look, ta-da, I am a magician, like I am way cooler than Lindbergh, look at me. But instead, he never resurfaces, or as far as we know, we never find another example of him living after this incident happened.
Right. Yeah, but that theory doesn't explain why the family and the wife didn't go to the funeral and never got a headstone for his grave. Unless
That's true.
She really is, or unless the family really is just that fucked up and they are just like that disillusioned from wealth and money that they don't even care to attend someone's in their own family's funeral, I don't know.
I mean, some people also wonder if maybe there was a parachute found with his body, but they paid off the fishermen to not leak any of that information to the press, and that maybe that is also why Madeline immediately had the corpse be taken away by a private autopsy person, because maybe she was like, hey, I don't want anything coming out about how my dumbass husband was super obsessed with Charles Lindbergh and tried to do some parachuting stunt that went wrong, because it's embarrassing. Maybe that would be like kind of a public embarrassment for her.
Is there like an insurance payout or something that she was expecting? Because maybe she didn't want it to seem like it was of his own fault or whatever. Like maybe she wouldn't get an insurance payout if he did some dumbass stunt. But if instead he, stepped out of the plane on accident or something, his insurance would come through. I don't know.
So we don't know if Madeline, his wife, got an insurance payout, but we do know that some of his business associates got an insurance payout following his death. And we're going to talk about that towards the end of the episode, because right now we're going to talk about theory number 2, suicide. Pop quiz. What's worse than waking up to the rake standing at the foot of your bed? Answer: never falling asleep at all. As a haunted person who lives in a home with no air conditioning, I have a lot of experience with sleepless nights due to being too hot and sweaty. And with summer quickly approaching, I'm getting ready to break out my secret weapon, Miracle-Made bed sheets. The weather is heating up, and your nighttime bedroom temperature has a huge impact on your sleep quality. If you wake up too hot or too cold, I highly recommend you check out Miracle-Made's bed sheets. Miracle-Made sheets are inspired by NASA and use silver-infused fabrics that are temperature regulating, so you can sleep at the perfect temperature all night long. If you're into skincare, switching to Miracle should be a no-brainer with their whole line of self-cleaning antibacterial bedding such as sheets, pillowcases, and comforters that prevent up to 99.7% of bacteria growth and require up to 3 times less laundry, which is great if you're a dirty little rat like me and hate changing out your bed sheets. Don't wait, upgrade your sleep before the weather heats up. Go to trymiracle.com/haunted to try Miracle-Made sheets today. And whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. And if you use our promo, HAUNTED, at checkout, you'll get a free 3-piece towel set and save an extra 20%. Miracle is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you aren't 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/haunted and use code HAUNTED to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. Again, that's trymiracle.com/haunted to treat yourself. Thanks, Miracle Made, for sponsoring this week's episode. And now back to your regularly scheduled haunting. Moving on to the next theory, many people believe that Alfred Loewenstein committed suicide. At this point, you might be wondering, but why would Loewenstein want to kill himself? Didn't he have pretty much everything going for him? A wife, a kid, a successful career, multiple homes and businesses, more money than most people can ever dream of? His life sounds like a non-stop party. But according to some sources, the perfect projection Loewenstein presented to the world was nothing more than a veneer that was slowly cracking in the months before his death. Apparently, he had overvalued his companies, and English bankers were in a battle with him over the true value of his shares and holdings. Now, I don't play the stock market. I don't invest in any businesses. The only investment I have at all is a 401k retirement plan, and I have it set to a target date fund, which means that I don't understand how to invest, so I just let Vanguard do it for me. So I'm not the best person to ask about or explain exactly what happened here with Loewenstein's stocks and bonds, but apparently the financial situation had gotten so bad for Loewenstein that in one day he lost £2 million, and his future success relied entirely on his ability to gain control of the Bank of Brussels so that his share values wouldn't tumble. Again, I don't fully understand this. Maybe the idea was that he could move his line of credit and loans over to a bank that would approve them if he owned the bank. Or maybe the shares of his companies would increase if he owned the bank. But whatever the case, he was super sure that they were going to give him control of the Bank of Brussels. So he preemptively sent out invitations to all of his friends and colleagues for a fancy dinner celebrating this new venture. However, the day before he fell out of his airplane, he allegedly got the news that his deal with the Bank of Brussels had fallen through. So now he's in this super weird predicament because he's already sent out invitations to all of his friends and family and colleagues saying, hey, let's go to dinner to celebrate the fact that I'm the new owner of the Bank of Brussels. But he just found out the deal isn't going through. And allegedly, this plane ride to Brussels was only scheduled so that he would be back in Brussels so that he could have this dinner that he planned. So, is it possible that being a prideful man who was about to be publicly embarrassed and lose a bunch of money, he made the decision to jump out of his plane to his death before he could reach Brussels?
Yeah, okay, so the only problem I have with that is then why wouldn't the people on the plane just say, oh, he committed suicide? Unless they were covering up for him because they were benefiting from some sort of insurance payout or something. Or maybe they just had so much respect for him and it was seen as like too shameful. And so they wanted to just say, oh yeah, you know, in the same way that sometimes like when like a father will commit suicide, you'll tell the children, oh, he was like cleaning his gun and slipped or something like that because, you know, it's just too sad to think that someone you love would no longer want to be here. So maybe that's what it is, you know? Maybe they're saying it was an accident because that's what they want to believe. But then again, it's like, so what? They helped him? They helped open the door? Because, yeah, that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, we still can't get past the fact that it's supposedly impossible to open that door by yourself at that altitude and at that speed. But again, some people that think it was an accident say, well, yeah, it should be impossible, but maybe just conditions were perfect for some reason. Maybe the plane hit an air pocket. I don't know how it works. And for a split second, there wasn't enough resistance to hold the door in place and he fell against it and fell out. Well, maybe the same could be said about the suicide angle. Maybe he just found the exact perfect opportunity to get that plane door open, or maybe the entire time he was quote unquote in the restroom, he was actually just trying to get that door open and finally succeeded and was able to slip out. But throwing a wrench into the suicide theory, a 1928 article for the Evening Standard discusses a lawsuit that Loewenstein was planning on filing prior to his death. Loewenstein was planning to sue Dr. Henry Dreyfus, a former business associate turned rival. In the months leading up to Alfred Loewenstein's mysterious death in 1928, he became embroiled in a public scandal due to an anonymous exposé published in the Belgian press. This exposé levied severe allegations against Loewenstein's conduct, accusing him of various financial improprieties and unethical business practices. The publication of these claims significantly tarnished Loewenstein's reputation, and some people think it's the reason why his financial empire was on the brink of ruin, that his stocks and company shares and values were directly affected by this exposé. Upon investigation, Loewenstein discovered that the author of the anonymous exposé was none other than Dr. Henry Dreyfus, a former business associate who had become his rival. Feeling aggrieved by the defamatory nature of the publication, Loewenstein was reportedly planning on filing a criminal libel lawsuit against Dreyfus, aiming to restore his reputation and seek legal redress. However, before he could initiate legal proceedings, Loewenstein died under mysterious circumstances, falling from his private aircraft over the English Channel. Is it possible that Alfred's death was brought about by these significant financial issues, lawsuits, and the embarrassment that he was facing? Or, like others have argued, does this just add to the growing list of enemies that might have ordered that Alfred be murdered?
Maybe he was murdered and then everyone on the plane is like in on it, you know? That guy that was double cheeked up couldn't even show his face to the camera after what he had done.
He had significant cakes going on in his aviation jumpsuit. Part of me was like, maybe it's just the jumpsuit, you know? Like some people just have that shape of lower back and to ass ratio that when they're wearing like a pair of baggy joggers or something, it looks like their butt's way juicier than it is. Maybe that's what Robert Little had going on. But I agree, it's very distracting. It's hard to even think about the murder or possibility of murder when you've got a BBL pilot mechanic in your midst. It almost seems like, was he a pilot or was he like a prostitute that had been hired? But then again, is that judgmental? I know that women with big asses can't help it. You have a big butt.
I do.
It's not your fault. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you're just God's favorite. So maybe Robert Little was just, you know, he was like a hockey player. Like hockey players have crazy butts because they're just on ice all day.
Yeah.
Sprinting.
Yeah.
Skating and sprinting across ice. So maybe it's just not his fault that he was cheeked up, but it's very distracting.
Yeah, I feel like everybody in the late 1920s, like 1930s, they were all like a little stocky. Like, you know, when you see vintage boxers, they just look like really square. Like they have like big rib cages and shoulders, but they're not like super defined. Their whole body is just like stocky. Maybe it was that. Maybe he just had 1920s body.
Yeah. Now, this has nothing to do with theory number 2, suicide. So to get back to the suicide theory and finish that discussion before we move on to theory number 3, which is murder, do you think that Loewenstein could have been so downtrodden by his failing companies, the fact that he had supposedly sent out an invitation to people saying, I have the Bank of Brussels, come to a dinner celebrating this new venture I have, and then he finds out he's not getting the Bank of Brussels? Like, would that be enough to push someone like Loewenstein to the brink of wanting to kill himself? Or do you think he's so narcissistic, because you kind of have to be a narcissist to be that wealthy, that he would just be like, oh, it didn't work out because stupid Dreyfus is telling untruths about me and I'm going to sue him and take him for everything he's worth?
I do think that it could be just like a moment, a bad decision at like a moment's notice. You know, we said that this was a very like playboy type dude who made rash decisions and just kind of, you know, flew by the seat of his pants, and some of those gambles he took would hit, some of them would miss. So I think, yeah, he was kind of an impulsive guy, and I could see the ego on this guy being so big just based off of what we know about him that he would, in a moment, rather die than have to face the perceived embarrassment of, you know, having to cancel this dinner or having to see all these people. You know, sometimes, like, so I'm a mom. Sometimes, like, when my kid is throwing a tantrum, I just try to remember that, like, whatever they're doing is just trying to take back power in that moment, right? So maybe that's his way of trying to take back power. Like, even though the choice was something that would ultimately render him powerless because he would be dead, in that moment, it felt like, okay, here's the decision that I can make right now that rips the power away from everyone else and gives it back to me. And
Yeah.
I could see that happening, but it doesn't answer the question of how he opened the door.
That is the one part that I keep coming back to, too. And that's also why William Morris, which, by the way, if you guys want to buy this book, this is my primary source for this entire series, is William Morris's book, The Man Who Fell from the Sky. It's really good. He's an investigative journalist. He found out about this story and he went to primary sources, interviewed people that were still alive, went back and went through microfiche and old newspaper clippings in libraries, because he did all of this research before the era of newspapers.com. Like, all of the newspapers I read, we're super fortunate because we can go on newspapers.com and read all of these articles. But he didn't have that incentive. And so a lot of what we know about this story comes from William Morris. And he says that he keeps coming back to the point of, like, even if he wanted to kill himself, or even if it was an accident, how did he get the door open? And so William Morris, who's kind of the expert on this story, says, I think that the fact that the door was open and supposedly nobody noticed it was open means it has to be a murder. So now let's move on to theory number 3, murder. So far, we've discussed the accident angle and the suicide angle, but now it's time for the murder angle. Because of all of the zany characters in Alfred's life that we've already discussed, a few strange things were discovered after his death. Shortly after the autopsy on Alfred's body began, reports began to circulate alleging that toxic matter had been found within his corpse. While the rumors were not openly backed by the police or coroner, they were extensively reported on in newspaper articles. The August 1928 edition of the Palm Beach Post, for example, wrote that a courthouse witness who attended a hearing about the autopsy's findings heard that, quote, the existence of traces of a very characteristic toxic matter or poison, end quote, were discovered by a toxicologist who examined Loewenstein's remains. However, that statement was then retracted by the toxicologist, who said that he had made a mistake and actually there were no toxic substances in the man's body. But in yet another statement given to the paper, the toxicologist further clarified that all he had found was normal amounts of alcohol in the man's system, and that that's what he had meant by toxic substance. Author William Norris of the book The Man Who Fell from the Sky, and the one person who has probably done the most research on the topic, believes that Alfred was murdered by 2 of his business associates, Major Albert Pam and Mr. Frederick Sarvazy. All 3 of the men were investors in a company called International Holdings. Since Alfred Loewenstein was the 3rd richest man in the world, his disappearance and death contributed to a major stock market crash. Author William Norris uncovered during his research that both Albert Pam and Frederick Sarvazy reported an unexpected profit after Loewenstein's death, which was categorized as transactions of a special nature, and that the total amount the men received was $13 million or $200 million in today's money.
That's a lot.
And William Morris also reported that some of the businesses that Loewenstein had, his business colleagues had taken out life insurance policies on him, and that those policies paid out from State Farm once he died.
I mean, that seems really plausible to me. His business associates would have murdered him, and maybe the wife was in on it. Why didn't she go to the funeral? I don't understand.
So these guys stood to make a lot of money if Loewenstein died. And if he really was as difficult as a lot of people say he was to work with, maybe they were just trying to find a way to get him out of whatever company they were involved with him with. So this company that he was one of 3 investors in, 2 of the guys made $200 million after Loewenstein went missing. We don't exactly know why. We do know that there was something weird going on with insurance. Maybe they bought out the shares that he had in the company. Maybe his wife didn't get the shares. Maybe there was some sort of clause that said, oh, in the event of death, the shares go back to the other 2 shareholders instead of being part of Loewenstein's estate. But then on page 257 of The Man Who Fell from the Sky, author William Morris says, quote, the second method by which money might have been made was through insurance. On the same day, July 6th, the Times published a story from our insurance correspondent which contained some interesting speculations. Quote, large insurances are understood to have been placed in the London market covering the risk of the premature death of Captain Loewenstein. These insurances are believed to have been effected in connection with companies with which he was closely associated, or to have been made by shareholders in his different enterprises. They are distinct from any ordinary life insurances that may have been placed with companies. A total of £100,000 was mentioned yesterday for the special policies, but inquiries suggest that this figure was probably either over or under exaggerated, and that a more reasonable sum might be about £50,000 for such a policy, although with someone as popular as Loewenstein, it's possible that it could have been much higher.
This is definitely like the most boring of all the theories, but I think that it does make sense. Yeah, but I don't know. It seems like a lot of people would have to have been on the murder. Like, you're telling me these two secretaries that were in on it? Well, I guess maybe they could have been. Maybe that's why they didn't say anything to the press.
For a lot of really big companies, if one of your super irreplaceable people dies, it's going to be a crazy financial burden to replace them, because they're leaving unexpectedly, not only with all the knowledge, but also with the forward-facing persona that they have. So people invested in your company might panic if your CEO dies, for example. If you have like a really badass COO that's in charge of your daily operations, and they are the one that's like coordinating everything. If they die, holy shit, now you're scrambling trying to find someone to replace them, and you're going to be losing money in the meantime from loss of efficiency, or just people perceiving that there's nobody there to keep them in check. So a lot of businesses will take out insurance policies on their really important employees, and I was super shocked when I learned that. When I was in HR class, they told us about this. We had a speaker come, he worked for like, I think it was Google or something, and they were saying this is super common. These are one of the benefits that you can say that you offer, so that if somebody dies and it takes a while to replace them, you can have an insurance policy, and part of it goes to the person's family and part of it goes to helping replace them, to like ease some of the burden that the company's going to have. And so to me, it doesn't necessarily seem that nefarious that they would have an insurance policy on Loewenstein, but it is weird that if there was a policy, they were being kind of secretive about it, because we only found out about it from investigative journalists.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like this theory doesn't quite satisfy everything that I need to feel like it's legit. It's also not that haunted.
Yeah. But also you pointed out, okay, so if he was murdered, do we think that all 6 of these employees would really keep their mouths shut? Well, it was reported that all 6 of the employees who had been aboard the plane at the time Loewenstein disappeared were living suspiciously comfortably afterwards, having seemingly all come into money.
What? Maybe they were already in money.
I don't know, because if you were already in money, you probably wouldn't be a valet lifting some rich guy's bags, right? Or you probably wouldn't be a stenographer being shaken awake on a private monoplane to write down some guy's ideas, right? Like, remember we said he was kind of, it's not that he was mean necessarily, but he wasn't considerate of his employees, because he would shake them awake if they fell asleep on the plane and he wanted to talk about something, which to me doesn't read as like a super nice guy necessarily. All of these people came into money, and that's kind of unusual, unless maybe we think Madeline Loewenstein felt bad and she was like, hey, this is probably really traumatic. I have a ton of money. Here you go. Like, here's a stipend for being such a good employee of my husband. I don't need you anymore. So like, you're gonna have to go find a new job. Here's some money.
Yeah, I mean, it could be that. I feel like when you have people who are so close to you like that, they become, a second family. So maybe she did feel a little bit sad, like, hey, you were completely depending on this paycheck to be my husband's personal valet, and I know you don't really have a lot, and now you're basically like shit out of luck. So here's some money to take care of yourself. And, she's so wealthy and disconnected from reality that she probably gave them too much, if that was the case, because she was like, how much is a banana? $10?
Yeah.
I mean, it's one banana, Michael. What could it cost? $10?
Yeah, maybe so. Now, the one person who did remain employed by the family was Fred Baxter. So, throwing another weird wrench into Alfred's death, his valet was found dead in Paris under mysterious circumstances only a few years later.
What?
On April 22nd, 1932, Baxter, Loewenstein's former valet, had gone to visit Loewenstein's son, Bobby, in his Paris apartment. At this point, Baxter was 28 years old and Bobby was 22 years old. According to police reports, Bobby had left his apartment at 4 p.m. to run some errands. And when he returned at 6 p.m., he found that his front door was locked with a note pinned to it that said, "Don't come in. Go and stay with the neighbor." Bobby then broke into his apartment by climbing through a neighbor's balcony onto his own balcony, and once he got inside, he found the body of Fred Baxter, his father's valet, lying on the floor of the living room, a gunshot wound in his right temple. Bobby reportedly panicked, fled the apartment immediately, and called Baxter's parents from a friend's house to tell them their son was dead. He then called his mom, then the police. And the rumor is that he had paid the police to keep the story out of his papers. And it seems to have worked because Bobby then drove to Brussels before flying to London, and it wasn't until over a week later that the first newspaper report of Baxter's death was published. And that was only published because a British journalist just happened to be friends with Baxter's family and had heard about the death by Baxter's dad. The newspaper article on Baxter's death pieced together the following details. Quote, "Slowly, from this source and that, the story was pieced together. It transpired that the revolver that had killed Baxter belonged to Bobby Loewenstein, normally kept in the glove compartment of his car. A razor and a knife had been found on the living room table, and the official theory was that Baxter had been intending to kill himself with one of those. Upon seeing Loewenstein leaving his apartment on foot, however, he had gone back down to the garage and got the revolver instead. As to why he should have killed himself, the theory advanced by the police was that Baxter had spent money that he had borrowed from Bobby Loewenstein on gambling and high living, and had been worried that because he could not pay it back, his friend would be mad at him. It was a tenable theory, but for two factors. In the first place, several friends testified that Baxter was very well compensated, always seeming to have plenty of money with him and appearing to be very cheerful and unworried up until the time of his death. Second, the amount of money that is said to have been involved, 500 francs, was a pittance. It was the equivalent of $20 at the then current rate of exchange, or less than $100. Nothing in Bobby Loewenstein's easygoing character suggests that he would have made a fuss about such a small sum, especially when his relationship with Baxter had apparently been so long and so close. Yet, for fear of what would have happened, the normally upbeat valet was supposed to have drunk a bottle of liquor found in his stomach during the autopsy and then killed himself. Before he did so, he had carefully ironed and laid out Bobby's linens and written a farewell letter. If the text published in the Melton Times of June 6, 1932 is accurate, and there is no reason to suppose it is not, it was a fairly unusual kind of suicide note. This is what Baxter wrote in his suicide note. Quote, "Goodbye, sir. I recommend my friend Alexander to replace me. Take him. He's a good man. Pay him well, at least 3 times what you paid me. Your laundry is the first on the right going down the Avenue de Maine. In future, don't drive so fast, for that is what has ruined my nerves. Give the money that you owe our neighbor, the Countess. I've spent your Swiss and Belgian money. I am a coward, and I haven't gotten the pluck to face the consequences. Goodbye, sir. Fred. P.S. Don't drive so fast."
Yeah, why would he kill himself at that guy's house, though? That's the thing that doesn't make sense to me. It kind of comes off as that Bobby murdered the valet, and then for whatever reason, or they were together in his apartment for some reason doing something they shouldn't have, or I don't know, and then something went awry and one of them ended up dead. I mean, I just can't picture Yeah, there's no way that's true. Oh, well, I just came back to my house and there was a sign that said, don't come in here. And then I was like, okay. And so I went to my neighbor's house and definitely didn't go in there. And I wasn't even there, by the way. Did I mention? Like that's weird. The whole thing is weird.
The suicide note is so weird. The suicide note is so bizarre. He's like, hey, you didn't pay me enough money, so now I'm killing myself, and you drive too fast, and that's what's making me kill myself, and please hire my friend, and also you need to pay everyone back the money you owed, but also you loaned me money that I spent and have no intention of paying back. Like, I mean, of course, it's hard to speculate about someone's state of mind when they do make the decision to take their own life because, you can't really understand the thought process, right? It's like it's usually quite illogical. Or a split-second decision that was just made in distress. But the suicide note makes no sense to me. And the Countess, who Fred Baxter wrote about in his suicide note, is thought to have been Bobby's neighbor. Her name was Countess Anna Carolina Menici, and she had the apartment next to Bobby Loewenstein, and her husband was an artist, and the couple had apparently known Fred Baxter super well. He used to do work for them on the side, like polishing shoes and pressing suits and doing laundry for these rich people that lived in this affluent apartment complex. And they called him Tiny Fred or Le Petit Fred. And upon hearing of his death, they were super confused. And especially when they heard that the amount of money he supposedly killed himself over was less than $100. They said that Baxter was super well liked. He had tons of friends that were living affluent lifestyles, and that she herself would have loaned him $20 in an instant, like without even thinking about it. And it wouldn't have even been a big deal if she wasn't paid back. And she said, quote, he was a good lad. He never gave us the impression that he was tired of life. In the book, The Man Who Fell from the Sky, William Morris says, quote, the Countess's husband could think of only one reason for Baxter's suicide, quote, that he was familiar with the intimate details of the Loewenstein tragedy and might have become tired knowing too much, end quote. So the neighbor thought it's more likely Fred Baxter killed himself because he felt guilty over something he knew about Alfred Loewenstein's death, aka everybody at the time thought he was murdered. Even all of these like rich people that would be interviewed later by William Morris, like the children of different people that he would talk to that were involved in the case, everybody said we all knew he was murdered. It was like an open secret that Alfred was murdered.
Okay, well then it sounds like he was murdered.
Well, but don't get too caught on that theory, because theory number 4 is that Alfred faked his own death to get a new identity and move on with his life. Proponents of this theory point out that Loewenstein was well known for playing tricks on people and was, for lack of a better term, kind of an attention whore. There are tons of accounts found in newspapers about Loewenstein dropping thousands of dollars on women, fancy restaurants, lavish flights, and exclusive nightclubs. One story paints Loewenstein as something of a gangster and tells of a time a man at a club got aggressive with a woman, so Loewenstein forced the man to drop to his knees and beg for forgiveness to avoid bodily harm. In another story, Loewenstein invited a group of people to a party to watch an international boxing fight. But when they showed up, Loewenstein was nowhere to be found. Confused, they waited around for a bit until they heard a roar overhead, and 25 airplanes flew over the sky in formation, and one of the planes wrote the words, "Hello, how's the international fight going?" in the sky, before all of the planes dropped party streamers that rained down over the crowd. Then, one of the planes landed in a nearby field, and out stepped Alfred, accompanied by a bevy of beautiful women to enraptured applause. Now, do you think that story is true? That kind of sounds like one of those stories where people will leave a comment saying, and then everyone clapped. Like, clearly you're making something up. Like, do you think that's true? It was reported on in newspapers.
I mean, it seems really weird. Like, there was no international fight, or there was, and
there was an international
fight. Oh, there was. Okay. Yeah. That's a weird thing to pay an airplane to say, though. It seems like very robotic? Like, why wouldn't you just say, like, how's the fight? Or where's Alfred? Like, something cheeky.
We can't get into the mind of a 1920s cutthroat businessman, but it's a weird story. And in an article for the Evening Express from 1933, more bizarre stories of Loewenstein's idea of entertainment are explored. Quote, for his entertainments, he paid in hard cash, which was always kept by his faithful valet. The valet carried thousands of pounds of cash about with him, and there were often 50-pound checks for head waiters. Pretty girls of Loewenstein's party always found notes of high denomination tucked under their dinner plates. During his visit to New York City, Loewenstein was entertaining at the London Club, and in the middle of the dancing, the lights went out and flashlights took their place. Suddenly, the dance floor and the club were surrounded by masked men, each one gripping an automatic weapon. Everyone reach for the ceiling, yelled one of the robbers. The first one that makes a move gets a dose of lead. Loewenstein's valet was then stripped of 1,000 pounds. The bandits did the job swiftly, and in a few moments, they were gone. Most of the guests were on the verge of hysterics, but Loewenstein was the coolest man in the club, saying, quote, nothing to it. Why, it was worth 1,000 pounds just to get such a kick out of anything. End quote.
And that's a cool thing to say. That's very cool. Yeah, I don't know. I'm so confused now because all of these theories make sense and none of them make sense at the same time. It's like there's two, like it's so open-ended, you know?
Well, so the reason why I include these stories is because they kind of paint the picture of somebody that is living life in the fast lane. He doesn't care if he gets robbed. He thinks it's funny. He is giving away his money to pretty women and to friends and waiters. He's also flying airplanes, like hiring 25 pilots to fly over a party and a skywriter and streamers. He also is known to start fights in clubs and bars with people that are offending women, allegedly. And one of them he makes drop to his knees and like beg for Loewenstein's forgiveness. And Loewenstein's like, I'm gonna punch you right in the kisser if you don't apologize to this young woman. You know, like it just kind of is this over the top example of a guy that either likes playing tricks on people, right? Like he invites people to watch a fight and then he's not there just so he can be the center of attention. Or he is, an attention whore. Like, he just wants attention. And other stories in the newspaper during the time say that one of the valets that Loewenstein had hired, he specifically hired because the guy looked a lot like him. So the valet was supposedly the same height, weight, hair color, eye color, skin color, and approximate age. And Alfred would sometimes play tricks on people by sending the valet in his place to different events. This has led proponents of this theory to wonder, could Alfred have somehow enlisted his valet to play a trick on everyone? Maybe the valet was supposed to pretend that he was falling out of the airplane. Or maybe the valet was supposed to take the tumble with a parachute as some sort of attention event. So everyone would be scared on the plane, like, oh my God, Alfred's tumbled out. And then Alfred busts out of the bathroom and he's like, just kidding, it was me. And Fred is down below, very safe, floating to a yacht. And that's why somebody saw a yacht. Or could he have somehow enlisted his valet to take the tumble or fall out of the airplane for him, and it was an accident and went super horribly wrong and the guy disappeared, and so seeing a rare opportunity to start over under a new identity, Alfred took the valet's place or otherwise somehow escaped using somebody else's identity to leave behind all of the problems that he was embroiled in financially at the time. And while this might sound far-fetched, there are a few newspaper articles from the 1930s that allege that this was one of the running theories of the time. One article writes of an unusual incident that happened prior to his death when a firm of private bankers met with a man who resembled Alfred, looked almost identical to Alfred, and this man asked for a loan of $2 million in exchange for some bonds to be held as collateral. So the bankers, thinking they're dealing with the third richest man in the world, say, yeah, no problem. They take these bonds from the person they think is Alfred, give him £2 million, and then when the loan comes due in 6 months and the money hasn't been repaid, the bankers reach out to Loewenstein only to find out that Loewenstein has no idea what they're talking about, and that the man they had met with wasn't him. Alfred even had proof that he was out of the country at the time and refused to pay back the loan on the grounds of forgery. When the private bankers went to cash the bonds that they were holding as collateral, they were informed that the bonds were stolen property, so they had no choice but to take Alfred to court. They were convinced that the man they had met with looked exactly like Alfred in every single way. But Alfred was able to prove to the judge that he had never met with these men and won the court case. The article goes on to say, quote, "The whole affair was a clever swindle on somebody's part, and shortly after this, the bankers went into bankruptcy. Here is a definite instance where Loewenstein was accused of having a double. And if we admit this, the question is, was it the man who got $2 million from the bankers who fell out of the airplane that day?"
Ooh, I like this theory. This theory is like this other guy took over Alfred's life, and so then that's why the wife didn't go to the funeral. I'm really stuck on why the wife didn't go to the funeral.
If we think he was gay and in a relationship with Hodgson, or if we think he was cheating on her with all these hot women he was supposedly going out with, yeah, maybe she's like, I'm not going to the funeral. My husband was a two-timing dog. Like, good riddance.
Yeah. Yeah, or maybe he was like an addict of some sort. I know back then, like, a lot of people were drinking a lot because it was post-prohibition or whatever, or around the prohibition time. I don't know if that's just like propaganda because they're like, yeah, we need prohibition because everyone's drinking. But apparently that was a thing. And I think like in the 20s was when Alcoholics Anonymous was founded too. So maybe that was a thing. Maybe he was like an addict and she was over it. She was like, yeah, he does all this stuff. He's like not even coherent. That's why people are saying he's so absent-minded, just like walking into polls and stuff. And I'm not even bothering going to his funeral because the man that I knew died a long time ago.
I think we can confidently say that even though he may not have been an addict in the traditional sense with substances, because all of his friends say he hated tobacco, he hated alcohol, which is why it's so suspicious that allegedly alcohol was found in his stomach, I think we can at the very least say this dude sounds like an adrenaline junkie.
Yeah.
He's starting fights, he's jumping out of airplanes, he's trying to break Charles Lindbergh's record, he's doing all of these really strange things to like one up everybody, which to me seems like, yeah, either he's an attention whore or he's addicted to the adrenaline rush in whatever way that he's getting it. Now, the final theory is theory number 5, the paranormal angle. There are a lot of paranormal directions we can go in when discussing Loewenstein's life and death. Some believe that he made a deal with the devil, and his strange disappearance was the devil finally collecting what was owed to him, Loewenstein's soul. Others point to some of the unethical business dealings that Alfred was entangled with, namely rubber plantations in the Congo. Nat, do you know anything about the history of the rubber trade?
No, but I'm assuming it's like not good according to this.
It was really, really bad. From the late 1800s to the early 1900s, the Congo was owned personally by King Leopold II of Belgium, who imposed rubber collection quotas. In order to meet these quotas, locals would be forced to work on the European-controlled plantations in the Congo. Villages that didn't meet their required quota were often burned to the ground as punishment. It was also very common for Belgian and German officers to punish workers with bodily harm. Because bullets were so expensive, officers had to get creative when coming up with punishments. So the consequences were usually cutting off the hands and feet of plantation workers who did not meet their quota, or who tried to escape, or who otherwise didn't contribute toward the interests of King Leopold II. And there are many horrific photographs from this dark era in Congo's history that show the amputated feet and hands of both adults and children being left out in the streets to motivate people to meet their quotas. This is obviously a horrific blight on world history that I cannot do justice to in just one paragraph, but I mention it here to illustrate that Loewenstein was invested in some truly evil industries. And while he didn't invest in rubber plantations until the 1920s, when the worst of the Leopold era was allegedly over, he did directly benefit, monetarily, from the brutal, barbaric, and unethical groundwork that the Leopold legacy had paved. So, is it possible that Loewenstein was somehow disappeared or smited by the powers that be as some sort of karmic consequence? Or does that give too much credit to a universe that allows crimes against humanity to happen in the first place? But expanding on the karma angle, as I mentioned in episode 215, Alfred had a reputation for being a cutthroat businessman who was known to lie, exaggerate, and intimidate in order to get his way. So might his demise have been directly linked to a lifetime of accruing bad karma?
I mean, yeah, it could. Like, it's gonna get you at some point, right? Like, if you are this playboy super freak, whatever you want to call it, yeah, at some point, your risky actions are gonna catch up with you. And I think 51 years old is kind of a long time to be living that fast life, right? Like, in the 20s, 50 years old is, you know, life is almost over at that point. So maybe it was, you know, just his time. Maybe the Grim Reaper had come for him, and because it was his time to go, it just happened like in midair, just like that. Bam.
Well, would you be surprised to learn that there's actually a prophecy associated with Loewenstein's death?
What?
So there's a prophecy associated with the death of Alfred Loewenstein and the death of his son, Bobby Loewenstein, who also died shortly after his father died, about 10-ish years after. Bobby died in a plane crash.
That's paranormal.
So I'm going to read an article to you now. So in an article published to the San Francisco Examiner on Sunday, June 8th, 1941, an author writes, quote, "You will all be destroyed by things with wings," shrieked the angry old witch. "But will we fill paupers' graves?" asked the hunter. "Tell me that, old witch, if you can." The hag's blazing eyes became set, as if gazing into the deep future. Then she said, "No. You will always have money. I see great money coming, but..." "That's all I need to know," laughed Jacques Loewenstein as he strode away, scarcely hearing that the witch of Ardennes screamed after him. "But that will only make your deaths harder," she yelled. The other day, when Robert Loewenstein was killed here in an airplane crash that had nothing to do with the war, everyone thought again of that prophecy. But it was uttered 3 centuries ago, when even the word airplane had not been invented. Nor had many people heard of the prophecy until the Loewenstein family shot into financial prominence after the last war, and the multimillionaire Alfred fell, leaped, or was thrown from his plane over the English Channel in 1928. Robert is the last of the Loewenstein line. Almost 300 years ago, Jacques Loewenstein was a Belgian shopkeeper, hardy, thrifty, but like his ancestors, only successful in a modest way. Every year, at a certain date, he went hunting in the forest of the Ardennes. But this time, his vacation was haunted by a worry. He had violated the family tradition by making a speculation which might ruin him before he returned. In the midst of the clean woods, he came upon a wretched, filthy hovel, and in its door an old woman, worthy of such an abode. The neat, clean hunter looked his contempt, and the hag glowered back, muttering something. Jacques lifted his eyes to a more agreeable spectacle, an eagle, perched within shot of his bow gun. Whether the bird was tame or sick that it should expose itself in such an unusual manner has been forgotten, if it was ever known. When the hunter raised his bowgun, the woman screamed a warning not to shoot. But Jacques wasn't taking orders from contemptible creatures like that, and did not even let it disturb his aim. The eagle fell at his feet, and a rain of imprecations on his ears. After examining his kill, the hunter finally bothered to reply, "So I and all my descendants are to be destroyed by things with wings?" "Yes," the witch replied, "until the last of you is to be found in the cemetery." End quote. So this article alleges that there has been a family curse for 300 years on the Loewenstein lineage, saying that everyone would die at the hands of wings. But because the plane wasn't invented until 1908, the curse didn't start on the Loewenstein family until Alfred, because he was the first of the Loewenstein line to be able to use an airplane. And he died tragically after falling, allegedly, from an airplane. And his son Bobby died in an airplane crash.
That is so creepy. I also like how the woman was like, "You'll be very rich." And then he was like, "Okay, that's enough." And just like walks away and like doesn't care about the rest of it. Honestly, yeah. the rest doesn't matter as long as I'm rich, you know?
Now, finally, we get to our final portion of the episode, which is final thoughts. And I do have a couple of bullet points here that didn't really fit anywhere or that I may have already mentioned and I just wanted to mention again. So I'll read them really quickly before I ask for your final thoughts, Nat. These are my bullet points. Was Loewenstein an adrenaline junkie who frequently partook in high-risk behavior? Could his leap from the plane have been some sort of stunt that went wrong? Could his wife's behavior be explained away by his infidelity? It was never confirmed that he was unfaithful, but it was certainly implied. Between rumors that he was in a gay relationship with his male secretary and rumors that he was cheating with all of the beautiful women he would bring with him to dinner parties. Could the rumors that he was gay have somehow contributed to his death? Maybe Arthur didn't appreciate these rumors, especially in a time in history and a place in history where being gay could result in death. Why did nobody notice any wind or pressure change when the door to the monoplane was opened? Could Alfred have opened the door on his own? There were rumors that he was suffering from rheumatism or rheumatoid arthritis leading up to the flight, and that's one of the reasons why his doctor forbade him from trying to beat Charles Lindbergh's famous transatlantic flight. Norman W. Ray, an aviation expert from Canada, tried to open the door mid-flight and couldn't do it. He even used a battering ram type instrument to try to get the plane door open, and it still only cracked it about 3 inches. In Ray's opinion, falling from a plane accidentally was impossible, and opening it on purpose in a suicide attempt also seems impossible. Robert Little, the plane mechanic, also said years later that he found papers inside the plane that Loewenstein had been writing down about money he owed different people and his active plans for the future on how to pay people back. But everyone else said that Loewenstein was quietly reading a book, not writing notes. Also, there's no way to know if Little was telling the truth or not because none of these alleged notes that he supposedly found in the plane were ever given to police. And if Loewenstein was reading, why did all of his friends say that he hated reading and famously would pay people to read things for him so that he didn't have to? Could Loewenstein have actually been dropped off somewhere prior to the plane landing on the beach? Or maybe he never fell at all? But then whose body was found? What about the fisherman that said that he saw somebody parachuting down from the monoplane and a private yacht speeding off with the skydiver in tow? Robert Little's wife, Julie Little, gave an interview after her husband's death, saying that Robert had told her that he was at the controls at the time that Alfred went missing. He said that he saw Loewenstein get up, remove his collar, jacket, and tie, and gasp for air. He told his wife that he suspected that somebody had poisoned Loewenstein. Why did Little and pilot Drew not notify anyone via the radio system aboard the plane? They should have radioed in that there was an emergency and that someone had fallen from the aircraft, but they didn't. And why didn't Drew land at the aerodrome? Why did he choose to conduct a risky maneuver and land on a wet sand beach? And, interestingly, Loewenstein had cheated death once before. You may not know this, but there's actually a picture of Loewenstein owned by AP Newsroom with the following caption. It says, "Fred Loewenstein, Belgian financier and one of the world's richest men, is pictured here with Mrs. Philip Boyer and E.T. Oatesbury of Drexel & Co., right after Loewenstein had barely escaped death by propeller from the Fokker plane he had brought with him to Philadelphia to be the guest of Drexel & Co., May 5th, 1928. This is the same year that Loewenstein would die. Is it possible that the prophecy is real and that the universe was trying to kill him via airplane many times before? I also found a quote that I don't know where to put, but I thought it might be relevant. In an article for the Times after Loewenstein's death, an anonymous friend told the newspaper that, quote, Loewenstein was a nature which flashed from the depths of depression to the heights of optimism, with but short pauses at any intermediate stage, and which gave him no rest from an intense concentration upon the matter at hand. This concentration resulted in many curious personality traits. He never read a book or a newspaper. He seldom wrote a letter where a telegram would serve. He never smoked, he never drank, because he declared that tobacco and alcohol impaired the physical fitness which was the buttress of sustained mental effort. He had no subjects of conversation except his two passions, business and horses. Every moment that he was awake, even when he was boxing with his private instructor, or being massaged, or taking his bath, or being shaved, he would spend in discussing his affairs. He was as unsparing of others as of himself, and combined in a high degree the qualities of restlessness and tirelessness." End quote. And it is now time to bring today's episode to a close. What happened to Alfred Loewenstein on July 4th, 1928, as his plane passed over the English Channel? Could he have gotten confused when exiting the bathroom and mistaken the door to the outside of the plane as the door to back to his seat? It seems unlikely to mix up these two doors, since the one to the outside had a large porthole-like window through which he would have been able to see that it was just the sky. But if he did, could a 51-year-old man with rheumatism open the door by himself as the wind and plane engines pressed air going hundreds of miles an hour against it? And if somehow he did get the door open, why didn't anyone inside the plane notice the noisy blast of wind and change in cabin air pressure? If he didn't open the door himself, then how did he get outside the plane? Could one of his employees have pushed him out? All of the research seems to show that more than one person, possibly even 3 men, would have been needed to open the plane door at the 4,000-foot elevation. If somebody had gotten the door open, could they have really gotten Alfred outside of the plane without a fight? Why was no blood or evidence of a struggle found inside the plane when it landed? But then again, it wasn't really inspected until weeks later. To avoid Alfred putting up a fight, did someone try to drug him or force him to drink alcohol? Alcohol was supposedly found in his system, although the toxicologist did originally say it was poison before recanting that. But Loewenstein didn't drink, so how would he have gotten alcohol in his system anyway? Would the stenographers really have kept quiet about this if they had witnessed it? Or were they too threatened in some way? Why did some of his employees end up living cushy lifestyles after their boss's death? Why did one of his employees that was still employed by his family eventually kill himself in Bobby Loewenstein's apartment? Why did Bobby Loewenstein, upon witnessing this death, flee the country? Why did he pay off the police to keep the story quiet? Why did he die in a plane crash only a few short years later? What the fuck happened to Alfred Loewenstein?
Girl, what the fuck happened to us just now? You're like, oh, let me get your final thoughts. And then you like list out every thought someone could have about this episode. I have no thoughts left. Like, what are you talking about? I can't come up with something new. You just like, I'm imagining you being like an attorney and there's a jury in front of you and it's a murder case and you're just laying out all of these different possibilities and the jurors are just like, I don't know anymore who I am, where I am.
I didn't talk at all about the prophecy at the very end there. What do you think of the prophecy? Is this just some like weird red herring? Or do you think it seems like maybe there's something to it?
I mean, it definitely seems like maybe there's something to it. Now, do we believe that the prophecy actually happened? Or was this just like a newspaper trying to be like, oh, listen, we have a source, which is an old hag, who said that there was a prophecy, and get a load of this, you know? Is this just trying to sell papers? Methinks not. As the co-host of a paranormal podcast, I do like the prophecy. I feel like it's going to enrage the Reddit fedora wearers beyond what is a necessary range of being upset about a podcast episode. So that is the theory that I like the most, is that obviously this is from the prophecy, and that is why the wife didn't go to the funeral, because of the hitchhiker effect from the prophecy.
Well, this could have turned into a 4-part series, but instead we did it in 2, you guys. You're welcome. I'm very interested to hear what everybody's thoughts and theories are below, because it's like nothing makes any fucking sense. Now, the super popular YouTube channel BuzzFeed Unsolved, which no longer exists, they had covered this story in an episode. They did it in 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes. So I decided to skip ahead to their theories part and see what they thought. And they all think he was murdered. William Morris thinks he was murdered. A lot of newspapers think that he was murdered. But the official explanation was an accident. And Madeline was very defensive when people tried to suggest the suicide theory, to go back to your point about it being a stigmatized way to die. So I don't know. I don't fucking know what happened here.
It's a prophecy. That is Occam's razor. Honestly, there was a prophecy. we don't know how prophecies go out, or can anyone make a prophecy and then that is why the prophecy becomes true? Because if that is the case, then we need to find and arrest this old hag wherever she is for putting
Maybe
that.
it was Baba Yaga.
I mean, that's making the most sense to me right now. Baba Yaga is clearly responsible for this strange turn of events. Amazing episode, Allie.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know what? I feel like there needs to, when you're doing those theories, like going through the bullet points, there needed to be like the national anthem of some sort. Perhaps the French national anthem, because this is a story that ended in France, or it's international waters. So I don't know if there's an international anthem that we can all enjoy. If there's not, there should be one. And that is what can be put over the theories.
It would just be every national anthem on earth playing at the same time.
Just like trumpets and pianos and drums. Yeah. It's just...
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yeah. The only thing that I didn't like, the only theory I don't like is the karma theory, because then I started getting mad because I was like, is this just a way for like us plebeians to feel better about not being millionaires or billionaires? Because it's like, yes, the only way you can get rich is if you sell your soul to the devil. And so the devil will come eventually to reap his reward. And so that way you're like, oh yeah, I don't want to be successful.
Right.
Because I don't want the devil after me. And is that what the real conspiracy is? That the rich people try to keep us down by making us believe that they're cursed because of how much money they have, so that therefore we won't want their money, so that therefore we will always be their valets and their secretaries and their stenographers?
Damn, I would love to be a rich person's stenographer. I feel like that would be really fun, especially in the 1920s.
True.
So I know that wasn't the point you were trying to make, but...
That's why I appreciate your perspective, because I would have never thought of that myself. Nat, thank you for coming on this crazy ride with me today. And I really appreciate your attention to this tale. Thank you for listening to my mental illness ramblings. This has bothered me. I will be thinking about this for many years. Would you like to do our sign off today?
BRB, gonna go talk about business and horses only. Those are the only two subjects I will ever speak about at all. And that is what people will say to me after my death. Bye.
Welcome to the closing credits for episode 216. This month, we would love to give a warm, heartfelt thank you to our Patreon donors who donated to us in the month of February 2025, letters N through Z. If you'd like to become a donor and hear your name shouted out on a future episode, head over to patreon.com/letsgethaunted, where you will not only get a shout out, but you'll also get access to episode extras, minisodes, personal hauntings, live streams, and much, much more. This week, we'd love to shout out Naomi, Naomi, Naji, Natalie C, Natasha M, Nathan, Necro Macy, Nicholas M, Nick, Nikki S, Nicole A, Nicole L, Nicole S, Nikki B, Nilza, Noah and Riley, Noah B, Inex Stein, Nadine, Oliver F, Olivia K, Olivia S, Oscar M, Padaka Ansani, Parker L, Pascal, Patricia Militia, Paula M, Peter Barker aka Camry G, Phantom P, Philip K, Phoebe, Phoebe O, Phoenix Crippen, Kwong LM, Rachel, Rachel M, Rachel T, Rake, Raven, Rayleigh R, Rebecca H, Red Moon, Red Sands, Ria, Raya, Richard O, Rivier, Rob D, Robert K, Robert W, Robin Nicole B, Robin P, Rory L, Rose M, Roxanne S, Ruby V, Sage, Sage S, Sam O, Sam P, Samantha H, Samantha P, Sarah W, Sarah, Sarah C, Sarah D, Sarah J, Sarah L, Savannah C, Scamantha, Scott G, Shane, Shania Z, Sean, Sean H, Sean S, She's Not Here, formerly Al H, Slampersand, Sleepy Siren, Slug Bunny, Smockin' Void, Smokin' Void, Sophie, Spencer, Stephanie N, Stuffy, Sugar Bread, Summer Joy, Sydney B, Sydney S, Tabby J, Tay M, Tajakester, Tosh, Tash, Taylor M, Taylor T, Teethman 27, Tegan M, The Ratmans, Tom S, Tracy, Tresca E, Tyler B, Erd Ferguson, V, Valeria R, Val Pal, Vara M, Vera M, Veronica W, Vicky T, Victoria, Victoria L, Wayne C, William A, Y2NLA, Yas A, Zach G, and Zeke G. Thank you all so much for your continued support of Let's Get Haunted. We cannot do what we do without you. This is the way that we are able to afford the majority of our expenses. Ad read expenses usually go directly to the editing process, and everything we make from Patreon pays for everything else. So we are so appreciative of everybody. Right now, we're in the process of revamping our website so that we can launch it and it'll look so cool. I hope, at least. I hope you're not disappointed when it relaunches. And we're just so excited and grateful that we are able to make content for you all and that you all are supporting us. We just really appreciate it and look forward to seeing you over on Patreon on our next extended intro. Now it's time for the password. This week, the password that you will comment on the photo dump located on Instagram at Let's Get Haunted is Save a Horse, Fly a Monoplane. See you guys next week. Bye.